Hey everyone, so this is the recording for the starter for assignment 2. So let's just go through Judy's phone widget or phone list example that's posted in the week 5 example code. So there's a constructor function for a phone widget that essentially contains all of the stuff for the phone widget, and if you look down a little bit in her code, there's a whole bunch of methods and stuff. There's another constructor function for a phone line. So a phone line is a phone line object, and we will have lots of phone line objects in the phone widget. So those of you that have done Comp 258 will find this really useful because it's really similar to some of the things we did in Comp 258 where we had one object and then we put it into an array of objects inside another object. So if you remember back to 258, you kind of hopefully remember that. So in the phone widget, it has a list, which is essentially an array of all of the phone line objects that we create. Okay, so you'll need something like that. In your one, there's a request object for doing an AJAX request. So that's inside the phone widget because we want to kind of abstract and put everything together inside it so that we don't need to use that stuff from outside of the phone widget. Then what Judy has done is created an object literal called _UI, which essentially has links to all of the various user interface elements for a phone widget. Now, strictly speaking, you don't need to do this because you can just put them directly into the DOM. But then you have to get element by IDs on everything to be able to get access to things like the title bar or the name text box and that kind of thing. So by having these links inside the _UI object literal, it means that you can quickly access any of the user interface elements inside your code. Okay, so that's why we have that object literal there. And if you look in her weather skeleton, it has the same sort of thing. So I assume she wants us to use that. Then there's a create UI function, and this function is to create all of the elements for your user interface for a phone widget. So it's all done inside here. I'll talk a little bit about the code in a minute. So going down the bottom, so that's the end of the UI creation function or method, and then there's some extra methods to do different things. So the add new name is for adding a new name to the phone widget. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is creating a new phone list item, and down here there's some things we're doing the sorting and stuff. So if you think about what you have to do for the weather assignment and what she's got in the phone list, starting to look really similar. All right, so you can use a lot of the stuff in this example to help you to do your assignment too. So going down, there's a whole bunch of things about sorting, which you'll probably use as well. And then the initialize function, it creates the user interface, and you can use it to create any other stuff that you want. And then just before the constructor function finishes, it calls the initialize function to then create all the user interface stuff for it. Okay, and then we have the constructor function for the phone line, where we can create phone line objects as well from there. All right, so again, there's a create UI function in the phone line to create the user interface for that. And so Judy's done things like created various sections, giving class names and stuff for the labels for the UI. So it's up to you how you're going to represent the UI of your inner elements. Okay? So really have a really good look at the phone widget code, because as I said, it's really extremely similar to the weather application that we're going to be doing. Okay, so have a look through it, and if you don't quite understand some of the stuff, then drop by and see me sometime and we can sit down and go through it if you want to. So let's just go through an example using the skeleton weather code that she's given to you. All right, so let me open that up in brackets. Weather widget skeleton. So let's open that as a brackets project. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of things. There's a constructor function for the weather widget, very similar to the phone widget. Down the bottom, there is a constructor function for a weather line, very similar to the name object or name line that we had in there. Okay, so let's just look at creating the user interface. Now, I'm not going to use exactly the same thing as assignment 2 because I don't want to give you the answers or anything, but here's an example of what you might do. So we want an object to represent the widget's user interface. Okay, so we want to go var underscore UI equals, and then we can create our object literal here. Okay, so what do we want in our user interface? So let's say the first thing we want is a label and then a text box. This is just an example, right? So just make something up. So now you probably only need to have links in here to the important things. So a label you're not going to refer back to in your JavaScript code because you're probably not going to change it. So there's no need to have a link for that, but you could do that if you want to. But you don't want to have a link for every single thing, just the important things like text boxes or select elements, that kind of stuff. Okay, so we won't need a link for the label, but we do want a link for, let's say, the user types in their name. So a name text box. So we can call this name element, whatever you want to call it, and then because we haven't created it yet, we're just setting it up, we just make it equal to null to start with, and of course we're in the object literal, it's a comma after it. So in a name element, the other thing we'll create is a select element. So let's have a select element as well to allow someone to choose. That's a good thing, we can choose something that's a little bit different. Let's say they can choose a paper like Comp 103 or Comp 333, something like that. So we want a paper select element. So paper select element, and make that equal to null. What else could we do? Let's do a button as well. So those are the main things we get likely to need for our weather assignment, right? So this is our button element. Okay, so that's the three main parts of the user interface: a text box for the name, an element to select the paper, and a button that will actually go away and do something. Okay, so then in the create UI, this is where we start to create the user interface for everything. Okay, so first thing is we're going to create a label for our text box. Okay, so remember all the document.createElement stuff we did in Comp 233 for assignment 2. That's the stuff we need to use in here. So we want to do something like var label element equals document.create, lowercase c, create element, and we're going to create a label element here. Alright, if you want to do CSS and stuff on all your different parts of the user interface, then you can set up a class name for it. So label element.class name equals say caption. Okay, and we could probably set up the 4 attributes. So when you click on the label, it should put the cursor into the text box. Okay, so we can do something like label element, and it's actually called HTML4. Is it all uppercase? HTML4. I think it is. I'll double check that later. Equals, and then the name of your text box. We'll call it text box name. That's going to be the ID for it. All right, and there's a label. And now what happens is the container is actually the div or whatever that you're going to use to put your stuff into. Now actually it might make sense that in our widget we might have a top part which is maybe has the main parts of your interface, and the bottom part might be kind of the display area. So actually, let's add a couple of divs in here. So we want maybe UI div. So we'll call it null. Oops, comma. So there's a UI div, and we also want to have a display div. Alright, so actually we should probably create a couple of divs and then append them to our container. Okay, so let's go create the UI div and append it to the container where our widget will go into. Okay, so var, we don't need to go var because the UI div variable is already here, right? So because there's a variable for that div here, we can just use it. So UI div UI div, yeah. Equals, oh no, sorry, because it's inside the underscore UI object, we need to put that first. So underscore UI dot gives us access to all of the variables inside it, so then we can get to UI div. I was wondering why it didn't pop up in the pop-up area. Okay, so UI div equals document dot create, create element, and we want to create a div here. Okay, you could give it an ID possibly if you want to get access to it later, but because we already have a link to that div, we don't actually need to give it an ID. So you could give it an ID if you want to, you could give it a class name if you want to, it's up to you. And we also want to create the display div. So underscore UI dot display div equals document dot create element, and create another div here. And then what we want to do is just append those to the container, and so our divs will now be inside the container that has our widget. Okay, so we'll just go container dot append child. Hopefully you remember that. So you're appending a child to this parent. So container is the parent. Append child underscore UI div dot div. UI div. So that appends the UI div first, and then we append the display div, so it'll go after it. Okay, so actually before we do this stuff, let me just comment that out for now. We should be able to test that and see if it works. So what's going to happen if I just go to the HTML page, you'll see that there's a div to put our widget into called widget-container-1, and then if we scroll down the bottom, there's a little bit of JavaScript which makes this variable connect to the widget-container-1 element div, so that gets set to that, and then we create monitor1, which is a new weather widget, and we pass the link to this div into there. So widget underscore container underscore 1, the link to that div is passed into a JavaScript, and it's container, so container contains that link. So anything that we append to container gets appended to this div here. Okay, so it's all going to be appended into there because that's what we pass in for the container. So hopefully we can test that out, and we should see a couple of divs appear inside there. So let's just refresh my local host, weather widget skeleton, and if we go to the HTML code, you'll see that there's div. Okay, so I must have done something a little bit wrong. I should see if there's any errors first. Always double check that you have, in case you have any errors. No. So, it could be that I just haven't got anything in them yet. Create element div. Appending that to the container, appending that to the container. Oh, we'll try the label and see if that works. So create the label element, and let's append it to the UI div. So underscore UI dot UI div dot append child, and then we're going to append the label element. Okay, so that creates initialize calls create UI. Create UI should do all that. Let's try it again. Doesn't look like it's working. Oh no, there we go. So now we've got two divs, and there's a label. Oh, I didn't give it a text content. Haha, that's why. Okay, so I need to give that some text content for the label to actually appear. So let's go back and give it some text content. Label element dot text content equals, please enter your name. Okay, so if we go back and execute that, and you can see our label appears where that div, where the container div is. Okay, so if you look in the HTML down the bottom here, you can see we've got our class label there. Alright, HTML4, I'll just double check my code. Where is it there? Where's the label gone? Oh, it's in the create label function. HTML and it's lowercase. Okay. Alright, so that should be lowercase HTML. Okay, so that creates the label. So let's create the text box now. So remember, we have a variable inside the underscore UI object literal that's going to contain a link to our text box. So we don't need to go var text box element. We've already got a variable up the top there. So we're going to go underscore UI dot not display div name element equals document dot create element, and we're going to create an input element. Okay. So then we want to document. Then we want to set up all the values for our text box. So underscore UI dot name element dot ID equals text box name, so that the label will give it the focus. Underscore UI dot name element dot type equals text. Just trying to remember what the type was for a text box. It's text. I think that's all I want for it. And then again, we need to append that to the container, right? So we want to go underscore UI dot container dot append child, and then underscore UI dot name element. Okay, so now we should see our text box appear, hopefully in our widget, unless I've done something wrong. So let's refresh that page. Yay! So we've got a name there, and then we have a text box. Interesting why it's underneath. I append it to the container, but I actually want to append it to the controls div, right? So it's not right. So always use the HTML part of the developer tools just to make sure that things are being put into the right place. So obviously it's not inside the right div, so let's go back. So it's not appending to the container, I want to append it to the UI div. Okay, so we want to go underscore UI dot UI div and append the name element to that. So let's go back to the page and try that again. And now it's on the same thing, and I can do stuff with it. Click the label. Oh, I don't know if actually the label does that for a text box. Anyway. Okay, so that's the text box done. What else did I say we were going to do? We were going to do a select to allow me to choose a paper. Okay, so we want a select object here. So remember we have a variable to store the link to the select element. So it's called paper select element. So let me grab that. equals document dot create element, and I want to create a select. Alright, so remember we have a select and then we have all the various options. Now if you're going to have, 8 cities, you're going to have to do a whole bunch of repeated code, which is creating all the options for your select element. So if you're, if you want some nice code, it actually makes sense to create a method for this, because essentially creating an option for your select is doing the same thing over and over again. You could be tricky and maybe use an array somehow, possibly, but let's just say we'll use a method here. So we're going to go var, because we want to keep this method private, or function private, to our widget. Okay, so var, what should we call this? Create option equals function, and we need to pass it two things. We need to pass it the parent element that the option will be appended to, and the text for our element. Okay, so let's do that. So all we need to do is create an option element in here. So var option element equals document dot create element. Create element, and we're going to create an option element. So that's that done. Then we want to set the text content for this option. So option element dot text content is equal to the text that is passed in to the function. And remember, we also need to specify a name element, a name for our option element, because that's what's returned back when the user selects it. And we'll just make it the same thing as the text. No need to make it any different. Okay, and then what we would need to do is just append that to our parent. So parent dot append child, and we want to append the option element. Okay, and so now whenever I call this function, it's going to append a new option to my paper select element. So let's just add a couple of some papers in here. So we want to go create option, passing in the paper select element, and let's go comp 103, and then we could just copy and paste that a few times for the ones we want. Again, maybe if you use an array which stores all of your papers, it makes it much. Well, actually, why don't we do that? Let's do a nice bit of code. Okay, so what we could do is create an array which stores all the different things that I want. So var paper array equals a new array. So we want comp 103, comp 104, comp 233, comp 333, comp 325. That'll do. Alright, so if we have that array, then I can just loop through the array and create an option for each one of those things. So we want to use a for loop here. So for var I equals 0. So remember, array start at 0 while I is less than paper array dot length. Oh, actually, paper array should have an underscore because it's a private element. So let's put an underscore there. So underscore paper array. And I++. Alright, and so what I want to do is just call our method. So create option, passing it paper select element, comma, and then the actual text is inside the paper array, right? So we go paper array at position I, and that just creates all the options for it and automatically appends it to the paper select element. And then the last thing is append the select element to our UI div. So underscore UI dot UI div dot append child, and then we want paper select element. And of course, if you wanted to, you could also put in an option at the beginning, which is please select paper, so that they know they need to pick something from the list. Okay, so I guess we test that out on the web page. Press F5, woohoo! And there's our select element. Click it down, and you can see it's got all the papers in here. All right. Again, if you look at the HTML, it will have created everything in the select. Cool. So you've got all those options there. It's not dot name, it's dot value, isn't it? I think I got that wrong. I think it's dot value for that option. Let's just double check that. Go into here. Yeah, there we go. It's dot value because that's the value that's returned back, not dot name. Okay, so there's our select element. I want that underneath the label and text box. So that means I want to basically put a break statement in here. Okay, so I want to go var br element is equal to document dot create element, create a break, and then just append it to the UI div. Okay, so it appends the break element before we do the select, and now that should be underneath. Okay, so there you go, that's in there. And then the last thing is to create our button element. So remember, we've got a variable for that called button element. So button element is equal to document dot create element. I want to have input, and then go, I didn't go UI dot, that's again why button element didn't come up. Dot type equals button, and then UI dot button element. What else do I want? Dot value, so that should be the text of it. Just put testing. And then you want to do like an on click for it. So this is how you do an on click for a button. Underscore UI dot button element dot on click equals function. And then in between your curly braces, you put the name of the function that you want to call. So let's just call a testing function just to show that it will do something. So just go testing bracket bracket. Okay, and when we do a click, it calls the testing function. And because this is inside our constructor function, that means that this can be a private method inside our constructor function. So I could just go var testing equals function. Alright, and what do I want to do in here? Well, let's just put some text into the display div. Alright, so what you'll do in the weather one is put all your weather information into there, but we'll just maybe. No, I don't want to give too much away, give you something else to do. So let's go, let's create a paragraph. So var p tag equals document create element p tag, and then p tag dot text content equals testing to see if this works. Cool. And then what we want to do is append that to our display div. So that's underscore UI dot display div. So this is why having those variables makes it easier for us, because we don't have to do a get element by ID every time. We already have a direct link to all of the important things. Dot append child p tag. Okay, so let's run that, see if that works. Oops, our button didn't appear. What did I do? I didn't append the button to the user interface. So underscore UI dot UI div dot append child underscore UI dot button element. Okay, so this time our button should appear on the page. Yes, it does. And that looks a bit weird. Just done something wrong. Click this, and you can see that it's added that text to the display div. Again, you can check the HTML tags. That's the controls div, the UI div, and here's the display div. Alright, so hopefully that will allow you to get started. So basically you can see what I've done is almost exactly the same as her phone widget example. So that's why I said it's critical for you to look at the phone widget example, because it's got a lot of stuff that will help you to do this. Alright, so that'll get you started for creating a user interface for the widget, and just take that and expand on it. Alright, catch you later.